The sun had barely crested the horizon on August 9, 1976, when the Rhodesian Selous Scouts, a unit shrouded in secrecy and audacity, prepared to cross the invisible line separating Rhodesia from Mozambique. The morning was peaceful, filled with the gentle scent of dry grass and a sense of anticipation. Operation Eland, named for the agile antelope but embodying the ferocity of a predator, was no ordinary mission. It was a strike aimed at the heart of the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army, ZANLA, whose Nyadzonya base, nestled 40 kilometers across the border, served as a nerve center for guerrilla operations infiltrating Rhodesia. The raid's success hinged on a group of men whose courage and conflicted loyalties would shape history. The turned African guerrillas, men like Nyathi, who had once fought for ZANLA but now wore the mantle of the Selous Scouts. The Rhodesian Bush War was a brutal chess game, with the white minority government of Ian Smith pitted against the swelling tide of black nationalist movements. ZANLA, led by Robert Mugabe, had escalated its campaign, launching attacks from safe havens in newly independent Mozambique, where Frelimo's government offered sanctuary. Just days earlier, on August 5th, a ZANLA raid on a Rhodesian military base at Ruda near Reid-Daly had left 4 soldiers dead, their blood staining the soil and igniting calls for retribution. The Nyadzonya camp, intelligence suggested, was a sprawling hub teeming with over 1,000 guerrillas, both trained and in training, poised to strike again. The Rhodesian High Command, desperate to disrupt this threat, turned to the Selous Scouts, a unit renowned for its unorthodox methods and ruthless efficiency. At the core of the Scout strategy were the turned guerrillas, former ZANLA fighters who, through capture, persuasion, or disillusionment, had switched sides. Nyathi was one such man. A young African guerrilla fighter, Nyathi had once believed in ZANLA's promise of liberation, but the harsh realities of guerrilla life, starvation, betrayal, and the slaughter of civilians had eroded his faith. Captured during a skirmish in 1975, he faced a choice: execution or cooperation. Nyathi chose life, not out of cowardice, but from a flicker of hope that he could protect his people by working within the enemy's ranks. His knowledge of ZANLA's tactics, language, and culture made him invaluable, but it also placed him in a moral purgatory, caught between 2 worlds that despised him. Under the command of Captain Rob Warraker, the 84-man strike force prepared for a mission that relied on deception as much as firepower. The Scouts donned Frelimo uniforms, their vehicles, 4 ferret armored cars and 7 Unimogs, 2 of which were fitted with 20mm Hispano cannons salvaged from obsolete aircraft, painted to mimic Mozambican military transports. Nyathi and his fellow turned guerrillas were the linchpin. Their fluency in Shona, their ability to mimic ZANLA's cadence and slang, and their intimate knowledge of the camp's layout and routines would allow the Scouts to infiltrate Nyadzonya without raising alarms. As the convoy rumbled toward the border, Nyathi's heart pounded, not just with fear, but with the weight of his role. He was no mere soldier. He was the key to unlocking the enemy's defenses, a traitor to some, a savior to others. The journey into Mozambique was fraught with peril. The Scouts navigated dirt tracks under the cover of dawn, their vehicles kicking up clouds of dust that threatened to betray their approach. Nyathi sat in the lead Unimog, his eyes scanning the horizon, his mind racing with memories of his days as a ZANLA recruit. He knew the songs sung at Nyadzonya, the daily drills, the unguarded moments when fighters gathered for meals. His whispered instructions to Warraker shaped the plan. Strike at midday when the camp would be at its most vulnerable, with fighters eating or resting. The turned guerrillas' insights gave the Scouts an edge sharper than any blade, but the risk was immense. A single misstep, a wrong phrase, a suspicious glance, could unravel the ruse and turn the raid into a bloodbath. As the convoy rolled into the Nyadzonya camp just past noon, the illusion held. ZANLA fighters, seeing the Frelimo uniforms and familiar vehicles, waved casually, some even cheering what they believed was a friendly visit. Nyathi's voice, steady and authoritative, called out in Shona, barking orders that mimicked ZANLA's own commanders. The camp, sprawling across a dusty plain, was alive with activity. Recruits drilling, commanders briefing, and logistics teams unloading supplies. The scouts' vehicles fanned out, positioning themselves for maximum impact. Nyathi's heart raced as he spotted familiar faces, former comrades, now targets. The weight of his betrayal pressed against his chest, but he pushed it aside. This was war, and survival demanded sacrifice. At Warraker's signal, the deception shattered. The Hispano cannons roared, their rounds tearing through the camp's central gathering area. Machine guns followed, their staccato bursts cutting down fighters before they could reach their weapons. The turned guerrillas, including Nyathi, played a dual role. Some manned the guns, their training with the scouts making them deadly precise, while others shouted false orders in Shona, sowing chaos among the ZANLA ranks. "To the river!" Nyathi yelled, directing panicked fighters toward a kill zone where the scouts' crossfire awaited. The camp descended into pandemonium, with screams piercing the air and smoke rising from burning huts. The raid's success was staggering. Rhodesian reports claimed 1,028 ZANLA personnel killed, a figure later contested but indicative of the operation's devastation. The turned guerrillas' contributions were indispensable. Their intelligence had guided the scouts to the camp's weakest points, and their real-time deception ensured the initial strike was unopposed. Nyathi, positioned near the lead unimog, fired with a grim determination, each shot a reminder of the life he had left behind. Yet, as bodies fell, doubts gnawed at him. Were these all fighters, or were civilians, refugees perhaps, caught in the crossfire? The question would haunt him, but in the heat of battle, survival left no room for hesitation. The scouts' efficiency was ruthless, but the mission was not without peril. As they withdrew, the convoy faced resistance at the Pungwe River Bridge, a narrow choke point guarded by ZANLA and Frelimo forces alerted to the attack. Here, too, the turned guerrillas proved their worth. Nyathi and others engaged the defenders in shouted exchanges, buying time for the scouts to lay charges and destroy the bridge. In the chaos, a tragic misstep occurred. A Catholic priest and a boy in a nearby car were killed, collateral damage that would later fuel accusations of war crimes. Nyathi's stomach churned as he witnessed the scene, but the mission demanded focus. The scouts escaped, leaving behind a devastated camp and a bridge in ruins, their retreat covered by the turned guerrillas' quick thinking and linguistic prowess. Operation Eland was a tactical triumph, a testament to the Selous Scouts' ingenuity and the pivotal role of turned guerrillas like Morris and Nyathi. The raid crippled ZANLA's operations, destroying a key base and yielding intelligence from captured documents that confirmed the camp's military significance. Nyathi's contributions, his knowledge of ZANLA's routines, his ability to impersonate their commanders, and his courage under fire were lauded by Warraker and the Rhodesian command. Yet, the victory came at a cost both immediate and enduring. The international fallout was swift. ZANLA and Amnesty International labeled Nyadzonya a refugee camp, claiming the majority of the dead were unarmed civilians, including women and children. A 1994 Amnesty report called the raid a massacre, citing accounts of non-combatants among the casualties. The truth, as often in war, was murky. Nyadzonya likely served dual purposes, housing both fighters and refugees, a common guerrilla tactic. Nyathi, reflecting on the raid years later, wrestled with the ambiguity. He had seen armed men fall, but the cries of the wounded echoed like those of innocents. His role as a turned guerrilla, once a source of pride, became a burden, marking him as a traitor in the eyes of his former comrades and a tool in the hands of Rhodesia's regime. Politically, the raid backfired. South Africa, Rhodesia's key ally, was blindsided by the operation. Prime Minister John Vorster, fearing escalation with Mozambique's allies, including Cuba and the Soviet Union, withdrew critical support, including helicopter pilots and maintenance crews. This loss weakened Rhodesia's military capacity at a critical juncture. Moreover, the raid's brutality galvanized international support for ZANLA, pushing South Africa to pressure Ian Smith toward accepting majority rule, a step he took reluctantly in September 1976. Operation Eland, while a military success, exposed the strategic short-sightedness of Rhodesia's approach, which prioritized body counts over winning hearts and minds. For Nyathi and the turned guerrillas, the aftermath was deeply personal. They lived in the shadows, their identities hidden to protect them from ZANLA's retribution. Nyathi's dreams were haunted by the faces of those he had fought alongside and against, a reminder of the war's moral complexity. The Selous Scouts, including their African members, were both heroes and pariahs, their pseudo-operations blurring the lines between soldier and spy, patriot and traitor. Nyathi's role in Operation Eland secured his survival, but it also bound him to a legacy of controversy. The Nyadzonya raid remains a polarizing chapter in the Rhodesian Bush War. It showcased the turned guerrillas' indispensable contributions, from intelligence to execution, but it also underscored the war's brutality and the human cost of tactical victories. Morrison Nyathi, like the operation itself, embodied the paradox of the conflict. A man caught between loyalty and survival, courage and compromise, whose actions shaped a fleeting triumph in a war Rhodesia could not win.